My name is Willa Grant. I am 34 years old. I work where silence is a contract and rank is a burden you carry alone. On paper, I am a consultant in logistics. In reality, I am something my family has never understood and never tried to. That is why on the afternoon our clan gathered under the sycamores behind the Grant farmhouse, my brother leaned across the picnic table, smirked, and said, "Still playing soldier?" My father did not look up from carving the brisket. "Act normal for once," he added, as if normal was a costume I refused to wear. I said nothing. I counted the forks aligned like formation, the sweat on the sweet tea pitcher, the way people who share your blood can turn words into shrapnel. Aunt Maggie laughed too loud. Cousins avoided my eyes. Ethan's wife filmed everything for her stories. The old flag on the porch hung limp in the August heat. I studied my brother's jaw, the triumph in it, the way small men feel tall when they slice at someone who will not swing back. He wanted an explosion. I gave him silence. He mistook it for surrender. Then the air changed. The first hint was a tremor in the lemonade glasses. Someone asked, "What is that noise?" Another voice rose, high and afraid. "Is that a helicopter?" Conversation fractured, necks craned, children ran to their parents. The sound grew from a distant murmur to a gut-shaking roar, a rhythm you feel in your ribs before you hear it in your ears. Napkins lifted, paper plates skittered, the tablecloth snapped like a surrender flag. A Black Hawk broke the horizon like a judgment, banking low over the tree line, throwing the backyard into a storm of grit and leaves. People scattered. My father's hat flew. Aunt Maggie shielded her wine. Ethan swore and ducked. I stood. The rotor wash tore through the yard. Confetti of invoices, party favors, and family photographs spun past my boots. The helicopter settled on the grass we used to play tag on, blades still roaring, the machine a wall between the life they assigned me and the life I actually lived. The door slid open. A 4-star general stepped out, cap secure, eyes locked. He did not scan for a man. He ran straight for me, cutting through the stunned crowd, his voice already raised to beat the rotors. "Colonel Grant, we need you now." The words hit harder than the wind. Conversation died. The only movement was the spin of the blades and Ethan's face draining of color. My father's knife slipped. The brisket fell. Somewhere a phone hit the grass and kept recording. I did not look at Ethan. I did not look at my father. I straightened, felt the weight of years fall from my shoulders, and nodded once. The general's hand gripped my arm. The pressure said urgency, not theater. All around us, my family froze in the tableau of a revelation they never thought they would have to survive. The girl they called a disappointment stood in a storm of their making, and someone who mattered had just called her by the rank they said she would never deserve. I took one breath, tasted diesel and dust, and stepped forward. The last thing I heard before the blades swallowed the yard was my brother whispering to no one, "Colonel." It sounded like an apology. It felt like a verdict. When I was 12, my father told me soldiers were men who failed at gentler work. When I was 18, he did not come to my commissioning. When I was 29, after a mission that took 11 hours in a lifetime, my brother told the family I had embarrassed us all. Disappointment became my new rank at the dinner table. They repeated it often enough that even the walls learned to mouth it back. Those memories flashed in a single sharp sweep as the general's grip tightened and the rotor wash clawed at my hair. Faces from years of holidays and small betrayals flickered, Ethan laughing as he forwarded a rumor he knew was false. My father sighing when he saw me in uniform. Linda, my stepmother, holding a coffee cup with both hands as if it could warm her silence. Every scene was short. Every wound was efficient. Back in the present, the general leaned to my ear. "We do not have much time, Colonel." The sentence was not a courtesy. It was a clock. I nodded, already reading the urgency written in the way the crew stayed half inside the bird, already counting the seconds until lift. My heart did not race. It calibrated. Training is repetition. Dignity is restraint. Behind us, Ethan found his voice and lost his certainty. "Wait. Colonel, you are still in the army?" His words trembled on the edge of a question he had never thought to ask because he had always been satisfied with his own answers. My father stared at the stars on the general's shoulders as if they were indictments. The old flag on the porch finally caught a gust and lifted, late to the moment like everyone else on that lawn. No one responded to Ethan, not me, not the general. Silence is a scalpel. Some truths are best delivered without commentary. I turned to the family that had named me a failure and held their gaze for the first time in years. Shock lived in their eyes, shame stood beside it. Neither knew where to put its hands. I wondered briefly if they understood that the only reason I had never defended myself was because carrying proof is harder than carrying doubt, and I was busy lifting both. I stepped toward the Black Hawk. The crew chief reached out, my palm met his. The grip was home. The general moved with me, his presence a shield as much as an order. The wind tore through the garden my stepmother had planted, ripping petals and pride alike. A cousin tried to film, the screen filled with dust and rank and the outline of a truth she would not be able to caption. At the door I paused, not for drama, for closure. I wanted them to see my face steady, my spine straight, my choice deliberate. I wanted them to know that the girl they mocked at noon could be summoned at 4 by a nation they forgot she served. I did not need their blessing. I did not need their belief. I only needed them to see the truth long enough for it to rearrange the furniture in their memory. I climbed in. The general followed. The door slammed. The world narrowed to steel and mission. Through the glass, I saw Ethan take one halting step forward, then stop as if an invisible line had been drawn between the man he had been and the man he might still choose to become. My father placed a hand on the back of a chair and leaned, not from age, but from impact. The pilot called ready. The blades bit harder. The lawn shrank as we lifted, the farmhouse reduced to a model of a place where I had been misnamed. As the Black Hawk climbed, the general opened a folder and slid it to me. Inside were photos, contracts, signatures I recognized. The corporation Ethan had boasted about, the land he was selling, the case that would decide more than inheritance. The mission was not a rescue from my family. It was a summons to protect them from themselves. The headset crackled. Colonel Grant, confirm receipt. I signed, initialed, breathed. Below, the backyard returned to stillness, save for a family recalibrating around a truth that had landed like a machine from the sky. I closed the folder and met the general's eyes. Confirmed, I said. Then I looked back down one last time and understood that some battles wait decades to be named, and some victories are won in the second you stop explaining who you are to people committed to misunderstanding you. The Black Hawk banked south. The house disappeared behind the tree line. The noise faded into the steady hum of purpose. For the first time in years, I let myself feel the smallest flicker of relief. Not because I had been called colonel in front of them, but because I finally did not have to carry the weight of their disbelief alone. The mission ahead was dangerous. The fight behind was done. I was born on the Grant family farm, a place where seasons dictated our moods and tradition dictated our worth. My brother Ethan was the golden boy, the firstborn who carried every hope my father ever had. He learned to drive the tractor before he was 12. By 16, he was managing cattle sales as if he had been born wearing a ledger around his neck. Every dinner conversation revolved around Ethan's achievements, his plans, his effortless charm. I loved my brother once. I loved the way he would carry me on his shoulders when I was small, how we would race to the barn in the evenings. But as we grew, the weight of my father's favoritism settled between us like a silent wall. My father, Richard Grant, is a man of the old world. He believed daughters were meant to marry, bear children, and keep the home tidy. Whenever I asked him to let me help with the farm machinery or join Ethan in the fields, he would shake his head. "That is not for you, Willa," he would say. "You are supposed to be a proper girl." The day I announced I wanted to join the army, he looked at me as if I had set fire to his barn. "This will ruin you," he said, his voice as sharp as barbed wire. He never came to see me off. He never called to ask how training was. To him, I was a daughter who had strayed beyond the fences of his understanding. I remember the day I left for basic training as if it were painted in steel and smoke. I stood at the bus station, bag slung over my shoulder, wearing the new boots that felt heavier than my resolve. My mother had passed years before, so there was no gentle hug, no last-minute advice. Just my stepmother Linda, quiet and uncertain, holding a paper bag with sandwiches I never ate. Ethan did not show up either. He said he was busy managing farm accounts, but I knew the truth. He thought I was making a fool of myself. I swallowed the hurt, told myself I would build a life on my own terms, even if no one at home understood. The army became my proving ground. I thrived under pressure, learned to lead, to read danger like weather, to trust my instincts when every second counted. But 5 years ago, during a high-risk mission overseas, everything changed. We were ambushed in a narrow canyon, pinned down by enemy fire. I had seconds to decide whether to hold our ground or attempt a risky extraction. I chose to defy orders and move my unit out, saving 12 lives but losing communication with command. By the time we reached safety, the narrative had twisted. I was painted as the one who failed to follow protocol. A decorated career turned to ashes overnight. I took the blame because fighting the system would have cost even more lives. I accepted the reprimand quietly, but the news traveled fast. Ethan heard distorted versions of the story from people who barely knew me. Instead of asking for my side, he delivered those poisonous whispers straight to my father. "They say she panicked," he told him. "They say she was reckless." I heard this later from Linda, who tried to defend me, but by then the damage was done. My father looked at me during my next visit, as though I had confirmed every fear he had about my path. That betrayal from my own blood cut deeper than any enemy bullet. I could have forgiven my father's narrow beliefs. He was raised in a world of simple roles, but Ethan, who knew how hard I fought, who once promised to watch my back, chose to side with gossip. He sealed me as the disappointment of the family, the daughter who failed, the sister who lost her way. Each time I came home, the walls of that farmhouse seemed to whisper accusations. My father would barely ask about my work. Ethan would crack jokes that stung under their surface. Even Linda's soft kindness could not erase the coldness that had taken root. When I returned from that mission, I stood on the porch of our farmhouse, mud on my boots and medals I could not wear proudly. Ethan leaned against the doorframe and smirked. "You look tired," he said. "Maybe this army thing is not for you after all." My father turned away without a word, his silence heavier than any reprimand. I carried that moment with me like a scar, a reminder that family can wound you in ways the battlefield never could. Linda came into our lives when I was 12. She was not the kind of woman who raised her voice or demanded attention. She moved through the Grant farmhouse like a soft shadow, always carrying the scent of lavender and a quiet patience that my father never appreciated. I never called her mom, but I respected her in my own way. She was the only person who would leave a cup of tea outside my room when my father's disapproval felt like a locked door. She rarely chose sides, but sometimes her eyes met mine across the dinner table, and in those eyes I could see a flicker of understanding. It was Linda who tried to keep the peace when Ethan decided he was done hiding his contempt for me. The day I learned I had been written out of the family inheritance was the day I realized the Grant name was just a banner my brother had claimed for himself. We were standing in the barn, dust catching sunlight in the gaps between old wooden boards, when Ethan tossed a manila folder on the workbench. "You have no place in this family anymore," he said. The words were flat, but his grin was sharp. "Dad has agreed. The farm will be mine. You chose the army over us, and now you can live with that choice." I remember the weight of that folder in my hands, the neat rows of legal text that told me I had been erased. Linda stood in the doorway, wringing her hands, but she did not speak. I wanted her to, just once, tell Ethan he was being cruel. Instead, she whispered, "I'm sorry, Willa," as if sorry could glue the pieces of my pride back together. My father was nowhere in sight. Maybe he knew I would not fight him, not then. Not when I was already carrying the shame of that mission's fallout. I packed my things and left the farm that same week. No big goodbye, no family photos, just a quiet drive down the county road with the farmhouse shrinking in my rearview mirror. I found a small apartment near the edge of town, the kind of place where the walls are thin and the neighbors know better than to ask questions. By day, I worked as a logistics coordinator at a shipping company. It was simple work, spreadsheets, delivery schedules, endless phone calls. On paper, I looked like a woman who had left her uniform behind and moved on, but the truth was different. Every night, after I closed my laptop and the hum of the city faded into silence, I would take my uniform from the back of the closet. I would lay it on the bed, running my fingers over the fabric, feeling the history stitched into every seam. Sometimes I would wear it for just a few minutes, staring into the mirror and reminding myself of who I really was. The world might have seen a disgraced soldier, but I knew the lives I saved, the courage it took to make those impossible choices. That uniform was more than fabric. It was the last piece of the woman I refused to let die. I kept my medals in a wooden box under my bed. They were not for display. They were reminders of the cost of doing the right thing when no one believed in you. When I touched them, I could almost hear the voices of the soldiers I had led, the ones who made it home because of me. But those nights were also heavy with doubt. I wondered if I had been foolish to hold on, if my father had been right all along. Life went on like that for years. I stayed out of family gatherings, avoiding the glances, the whispers, the unspoken judgment. Ethan sent me one text on Christmas, a photo of him and Dad standing in front of the barn with new equipment. The caption said, "Look what we built without you." I deleted it without replying. I had learned that some battles are lost simply by giving them your attention. I thought I had finally left that world behind, that I could live quietly without reopening the wounds of my past. But that illusion shattered when I overheard a conversation at a local cafe. A friend of Ethan's was bragging about a deal, about selling off a large piece of the Grant land to a corporation with military contracts. The words burned like fire in my chest. That land wasn't just soil and fences, it held every memory of my mother, every step of my childhood, and the echoes of a family that had once meant something. I realized then that my fight was not over. I had believed I was done with battles, but the war had found me again. I had thought I was free of the world I once bled for, until I discovered that Ethan was selling off the land that carried both our history and our honor. By the time the family gathered again under the sycamores, the air already tasted like money and old grudges. Ethan stood at the head of the picnic table with a laptop, a projector, and the self-satisfied grin of a man about to auction history to the highest bidder. He tapped a slide. Acreage numbers and projected yields glowed against the white bedsheet Linda had hung to keep flies off the food. Ethan cleared his throat. "We are liquidating the East Pasture, the Fallow Ridge, and the Lower Creek lots. The corporation will pay above market. They will assume all environmental liabilities. They will redevelop the land into something productive." Dad agrees. He knows I understand business better than he ever did. My father nodded, not at Ethan, but at the spreadsheet, as if numbers could bless a betrayal. I said nothing. My pulse slowed, not from calm, but from calculation. I watched the cursor circle a logo in the corner of the slide. I knew that emblem. I had seen it stamped on redacted contracts and sealed boxes. The company was a shell for a defense subcontractor under federal investigation for bid rigging, falsified testing, and the quiet purchase of rural parcels near training facilities. Ethan looked at me like a prosecutor who had already won the verdict. "You think wearing a uniform makes you better? Look at you now." Nothing. He let the word hang, fat with triumph. I examined the document packet at his elbow, saw misaligned page numbers, a missing annex, a non-disclosure written to gag, not to protect. I could practically hear the clauses whispering liability. My father folded his arms and spoke without looking at me. "Ethan knows business more than I ever did. He will secure the family's future." The line was rehearsed, the verdict pre-written. Linda tried to interrupt, then retreated when my father's jaw set. The cousins watched the show like they were at a county fair, voting with their silence for the loudest man on stage. I moved closer to the projector, pretending to read yield tables. In the reflection of the screen, I caught Ethan's eyes. He mistook scrutiny for surrender again. I photographed the signature blocks with a phone I kept on silent, then slid the packet toward me under the pretense of straightening the pages. Annex D Risk Mitigation Plan, missing. Annex F, Federal Vendor Clearance, redacted. "Above market now, guaranteed returns later," Ethan continued, pacing like a televangelist. "We will finally modernize. We will not be stuck in the past because one person cannot let go of a costume." He gestured toward me with an open palm, faux magnanimity masquerading as leadership. I remembered the canyon, the heat, the 12 soldiers who lived because I refused to follow a dead order. "Nothing," he had said. 12 lives argued otherwise. I asked one question, quiet and precise. "Who vetted the buyer?" Ethan rolled his eyes. "Real lawyers, real money. You would not understand." My father chuckled, a small approving sound that told me the courtroom was closed to testimony. I turned to Linda, her lips parted, then closed. She knew something was wrong. She always did. She never knew how to stop it. The projector whirred. The breeze lifted the white sheet and warped the numbers, as if the land itself objected to being converted into a line item. I traced the legal entity listed as purchaser, then the parent company, then the holding firm incorporated in Delaware 3 months after my reprimand. Patterns lock together if you have seen enough conspiracies dressed as efficiencies. Ethan closed the laptop with theatrical finality. Sign here, he said, sliding a consent form across the table. Do the decent thing for once. My father pushed a pen toward me, eyes stern but pleading. I looked at the pen and saw a weapon aimed at the past. I did not reach for it. I reached for the truth I had been trained to recognize. I took the form, flipped it, and photographed the watermark. The same classification code I had seen on confiscated procurement scams. Ethan's mouth twitched. He knew I had noticed. You cannot stop this, he hissed under his breath. You do not belong here. I smiled without warmth. Belonging is a luxury. Evidence is a language. I speak the second fluently. I slid the papers back and stood. The air smelled like grass and diesel. My father repeated his line. I nodded, memorizing clauses. The war stayed with me. That night, when the house quieted and the voices of my relatives faded into murmurs upstairs, I slipped into my father's study. The room still smelled like tobacco and old paper, the scent of his unyielding authority. His desk was as organized as a battlefield map. Neat rows of ledgers, contracts, and photographs of Ethan shaking hands with local business owners. I moved carefully, the creak of every wooden board threatening to betray me. My fingers hovered over a thick folder marked with the corporate logo I had seen earlier on Ethan's slides. I opened it, scanning the fine print, my pulse drumming faster with each page. These contracts were not just about selling farmland. They were laced with conditions and subclauses that hinted at something larger, something dangerous. I used my phone's camera to take photos, the faint click of the shutter swallowed by the hum of the ceiling fan. Annexes were missing, terms were deliberately vague. As I turned the pages, I saw traces of Ethan's handwriting, his name, his initials, and shortcuts that screamed carelessness. It was clear he was hiding something from both my father and the family. My jaw clenched, but I forced myself to keep steady, capturing every document that could expose the deal for what it truly was. A photograph on my father's desk caught my attention. It was from years ago, when Ethan and I were teenagers. He was leaning against the barn, smiling like the world already belonged to him. I remembered that day too well. It was the same afternoon when one of his careless actions almost cost us the farm's equipment. He had forgotten to secure the grain silo door, and half the feed spilled across the ground. Instead of owning up, Ethan told Dad I had been the one who left it open. I took the blame, standing there with my father's disappointment burning into me. It was my first taste of how easily Ethan twisted the truth to protect himself. Years later, the pattern continued. When I returned from deployment, bruised and exhausted, Ethan whispered to anyone who would listen that my so-called heroics had caused unnecessary chaos. He fed my father's stories about me being reckless, about how I wasn't fit to carry the family name. I tried to ignore it, but those lies grew roots in my father's mind, poisoning whatever faith he had left in me. As I photographed the last document, a cold realization settled in. This wasn't just a family dispute over land. The company Ethan was dealing with had contracts with defense contractors I'd seen in classified reports. They were linked to incidents I'd witnessed firsthand, equipment failures that cost lives, unethical testing, backdoor deals that put soldiers at risk. My brother's greed was dragging the family into a war they didn't even understand. I paused for a moment, my hand resting on the folder. My reflection stared back from the glass frame of a photo of my late mother. Her eyes seemed to question me, to remind me that honor isn't something you inherit. It's something you fight for. I couldn't walk away, not this time. I quietly closed the folder, placing everything back exactly where I found it. Then I slid my phone into my pocket and picked up the backup copies I had made. The silence of the house pressed against me as I stepped out of the study. I could hear Ethan snoring faintly down the hallway, unaware that I had just gathered the evidence that could unravel his scheme. In my room, I laid out the documents I had captured on my laptop, checking each photo for clarity. The text was dense, but I knew what I was looking for. Trails of shell companies, overlapping signatures, and hidden liabilities. My suspicion hardened into certainty. Ethan was not just reckless. He was aligning himself with people who would devour this family if it meant profit. I stuffed the printed copies into my backpack and zipped it tight. The sound of the zipper felt like the click of a weapon being armed. As I rested the bag beside my bed, I whispered to myself, "This is more than a family matter. This is a battle I cannot ignore." My hands lingered on the straps, my heart heavy yet clear. I turned off the lamp and sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the shadowed outline of the backpack. That bundle of papers, silent and unassuming, was more dangerous than any weapon I had carried in combat. It could expose everything: Ethan's lies, the company's corruption, even the fractures within my own family. I tightened the straps, locking the zippers together. This was not just evidence, it was the turning point. As I lay back, the echoes of Ethan's words haunted me. Look at you now, nothing. But in the darkness, I knew this backpack, heavy with truth, would change everything. It was no longer just about saving face or defending my name. This was about protecting something bigger than all of us: our history, our honor, and perhaps even lives. When I finally drifted into restless sleep, I knew that the next time I faced my brother, nothing would ever be the same. The next morning, I woke with the weight of the documents still pressing against my thoughts like a loaded weapon. I spent hours reviewing every photo I had taken, scanning for details I might have missed, and cross-referencing the corporate names with what I remembered from my service. By mid-afternoon, I knew I needed confirmation from someone who understood the shadowy underworld of defense contracts better than anyone in my family ever could. I picked up the phone and called an old friend, Sergeant Luke Daniels, one of the few people I trusted from my unit. Luke answered with the same steady voice I remembered from our time overseas. I explained briefly and carefully what I had found: Ethan's deal, the corporate shell companies, the redacted clauses. Luke's silence on the other end stretched long enough to make my stomach tighten. Finally, he said, "Willa, that company has been on the radar for months. There's an active investigation involving fraud and illegal testing. I can't share the details, but if Ethan is tied to them, he's swimming in dangerous waters." His words confirmed what I already feared. This wasn't just about the farm anymore. This was a web of corruption that could hurt more than just my family's reputation. I thanked him, my voice low, and Luke added, "Whatever you do, be careful. These people play dirty. They don't care who gets hurt as long as they make their profit." That warning stayed with me long after I hung up. Later that evening, as I sat on my small apartment's balcony, my phone buzzed again. The caller ID made my breath catch. It was a restricted number, one I hadn't seen in years. I answered, and a familiar voice cut through the static. "Colonel Grant," the voice said. "We may need you, Willa. This involves your family." It was General Crawford, the 4-star leader who had once overseen some of the toughest operations of my career. Hearing his voice again felt like stepping back into a world I had promised myself I had left behind. "Sir?" I asked, my heart already pounding. He didn't waste time. "Your brother's company is tied to a defense contract under federal review. We need someone who understands the terrain, someone who has both military experience and a personal connection. I know this puts you in a difficult position, but we need to talk about your next steps." The line went quiet for a moment, as though he was letting me absorb the weight of what he'd just said. My throat tightened. I wanted to say no, to stay out of it, but a part of me, the soldier still buried under civilian clothes, knew I couldn't ignore this call. After I hung up, I sat in the dark for a long time, my mind circling the same impossible choice. I could expose Ethan for his greed and recklessness, but doing so would publicly humiliate my father and tear apart what little remained of our family. Or I could protect them, pretend I didn't know the truth, and let the farm, and perhaps countless lives, fall into the hands of a corrupt corporation. My heartbeat thudded louder with every passing second. I remembered all the times Ethan mocked me, the cold stares from my father, and the quiet empathy from Linda. But I also remembered the voices of my soldiers, the ones who trusted me with their lives. I couldn't stay silent, not when I saw danger staring me in the face. I poured a glass of water, hands trembling slightly as I tried to calm my nerves. The city outside my window felt distant, almost unreal. All I could see was the land where I grew up, the creek where Ethan and I used to fish, the old barn that had weathered more storms than any of us. If I did nothing, all of that would be sold off to people who would bulldoze the past without a second thought. By the time the clock struck midnight, my decision was made. I pulled out the backpack where I kept the copies of the contracts and placed it on the table like a declaration of war. My path was clear. I had to act, but I would do it quietly, strategically, and on my terms. This wasn't just about Ethan anymore. It wasn't just about me. This was about protecting something far greater, our family's legacy, and the lives that could be affected if this company continued its dirty work. 2 days later, Ethan showed up unannounced at my apartment. He didn't bother knocking politely. He slammed his hand against the door until I opened it. His face was flushed with anger, his usual smirk sharpened into something colder. He stepped inside without an invitation, scanning the room as if he could spot the evidence I'd been collecting just by looking hard enough. "You've been digging," he said, his voice low but edged like a knife. "I know you've been snooping through Dad's office and talking to people you shouldn't. I don't care what you think you found, Willa. This deal is happening. Sign the papers or you're out forever. Do you hear me? You're already nothing to this family." I leaned against the counter, arms crossed, saying nothing. Silence has power, and I let mine stretch between us. He hated when I didn't take the bait, when I refused to give him a reaction. My calm seemed to make him even angrier. He stepped closer, his finger jabbing at me as if he could physically push his will into my chest. "Do you think wearing that uniform once made you special? You're washed up, Willa. A disgrace. Stop pretending like you're protecting anyone." I didn't respond. I simply watched him with a level stare, my mind already far from his words, running through the checklist of the files I'd secured. I'd been careful: screenshots, encrypted backups, copies stored on a drive he couldn't touch. He didn't realize I had already sent preliminary data to my former contacts. I didn't need his approval. I didn't need his permission to do what was right. When he realized I wasn't going to answer, he threw his hands up in frustration and stormed toward the door. "Fine," he barked. "Don't come crying to me when this blows up in your face. But don't think for a second you'll have any place in this family when I'm done. You're out, Willa, for good." He slammed the door hard enough to rattle the frames on my walls. I exhaled slowly, forcing the tension from my shoulders. He could hurl all the threats he wanted. They didn't scare me. I returned to my desk and plugged in the hard drive I'd been building over the past few days. Every photo, every clause, every redacted signature was carefully cataloged. I reviewed it all one more time before opening a secure line to my contacts in the special operations unit I once worked alongside. It had been years since I sent them anything, but tonight I typed the message with a soldier's precision. "Need immediate review. Urgent. Involves corrupt defense contracts tied to private land acquisitions. Data attached. Confirm receipt." Within minutes, a response came. The name on the screen was one I hadn't seen since the day of my reprimand: Captain Owens. His reply was brief but decisive. "Data received. Stay where you are. Stand by for further instructions. General Crawford will contact you directly." My heart thumped, a slow, deliberate rhythm. I was back in it. Not by choice, but by necessity. This wasn't just about family disputes or inheritance. I could feel the shadow of something bigger moving just out of sight, something dangerous enough to require my old team's attention. It was both terrifying and strangely liberating, knowing I wasn't alone in this fight. The hours after Ethan's visit passed in a blur. I triple-checked the locks on my apartment and closed the blinds. I organized the printed copies of the contracts and tucked them into a separate envelope, just in case I needed to hand them over in person. The tension in the air felt electric, like the moment before a storm breaks. My instincts told me that Ethan's temper wasn't the only threat circling. Near midnight, I stepped out onto my small balcony. The city lights flickered in the distance, but the sky above was dark and endless. I leaned on the railing, looking up, letting the cold night air fill my lungs. Somewhere far off, I thought I heard the faint hum of a rotor, just a whisper against the night. It could have been nothing, just my imagination conjuring the sound of a Black Hawk before it arrived. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. I tightened my grip on the railing, my mind clear and steady. Whatever was coming, I was ready. The pieces were in motion now. I glanced back inside at the backpack sitting on my desk, zipped and waiting. That bag held not just evidence, but the weight of a decision that could change everything. For me, for my family, and for the farm that had once defined us. As the distant hum faded, I whispered to myself, "This isn't over." I turned back inside, locking the door behind me. The sky above seemed to pulse with anticipation, and I couldn't shake the feeling that somewhere, out there, the Black Hawk was already on its way. The sound came first, a low, distant vibration that rolled across the fields like a warning. At first, no one paid much attention. It could have been a tractor in the distance, or maybe a truck rolling down the country road. But as the rumble deepened and the windows of the farmhouse began to tremble, Everyone stopped what they were doing. Heads tilted, eyes squinted toward the horizon. I felt it before I saw it. The pulse of rotor blades, faint but unmistakable, stirred the air around us. A gust of wind blew across the yard, rattling the sycamore branches and scattering paper plates from the picnic table. People rose from their chairs, hands shielding their eyes. I stood at the edge of the yard, heart pounding in sync with the growing roar above. Then it appeared. A Black Hawk helicopter, dark and imposing, sliced through the afternoon sky. Its shadow crawled across the fields, stretching over the barn and swallowing the yard in its path. The sheer power of its approach silenced everyone. Children clung to their parents. Someone gasped. I saw Ethan's smirk falter, the color draining from his face as he tried to understand what he was seeing. The helicopter circled once, its blades chopping the air with a ferocity that felt both familiar and haunting. I stayed rooted to the ground, my boots pressed into the earth I had once called home. Dust swirled around us, stinging my eyes, but I didn't move. My silence was heavier than any words I could have spoken. As the Black Hawk descended, the wind turned violent. Tablecloths flew into the air, cups rolled across the grass, and Linda held onto her hat with both hands. My father stood near the porch, his hand shielding his face, but his eyes never left the aircraft. I could see it, the confusion, the unspoken questions. He knew helicopters like this didn't land on private farmland unless something extraordinary was about to happen. The skids touched the ground with a thud that echoed through my chest. The rotor wash sent a hurricane of leaves and dirt whipping around the yard. I squinted through the storm of dust and watched the side door slide open. Out stepped General Crawford, his posture as commanding as I remembered. The sun caught the stars on his uniform, flashing like tiny shards of authority. He didn't hesitate. His eyes locked on me immediately. Without glancing at anyone else, he strode forward, boots pounding against the earth. The entire family watched as if frozen in place, the noise of the helicopter drowning out every whisper. When he stopped in front of me, he raised his voice to cut through the roar. "Colonel Grant, we need you now." The words fell like a stone in a still pond, sending ripples through every face around me. Colonel, not Willa, not daughter, not sister, Colonel. The rank they never believed I had truly earned. The air seemed to thicken as silence swallowed the yard. I saw Ethan out of the corner of my eye. His expression had crumbled, the arrogance gone, replaced by something raw, shock, maybe fear. His mouth opened, but no words came out. For once he had nothing to say. My father stood just behind him, eyes wide, his weathered hands tightening around the porch railing. He looked like a man who had just realized he'd been standing on the wrong side of a line all along. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. My gaze swept from Ethan to my father, steady and unyielding. Years of their doubt, their judgment, all of it hung in that single look. I could see the questions burning in their minds. How long had I been Colonel Grant? How much of me had they failed to see? The rotor wash flattened the grass around my boots. As General Crawford placed a firm hand on my shoulder, I gave a single nod, the kind that carried both recognition and resolve. My silence spoke for me. I wasn't here to prove anything. I was here because the world outside our family drama needed me again, and because some truths didn't require explanation. As I turned slightly toward the helicopter, I caught Ethan's eyes. His expression said what he couldn't. He'd misjudged me, underestimated me, and now he didn't know what to do with that realization. I let the moment hang, wordless but sharp, before stepping forward into the gusting wind. The rotors were still hammering the air when General Crawford turned to face my family. His voice cut through the noise with the force of a verdict. "We are investigating the same corporation your son is dealing with." The words landed like a detonation. Conversations died mid-breath, faces stiffened. Ethan blinked, then forced a laugh that sounded like metal scraping concrete. "You do not know what you are talking about," he shot back, trying to square his shoulders, trying to look taller in front of a man who had commanded continents. "This is a legitimate transaction, above market, clean. We vetted everything." His gaze darted to me, accusation sharpening. "She is the one stirring this up. She always has to be the hero." General Crawford did not even look at him. He handed my father a single printed page pulled from a folder, the government seal stamped at the top. "This entity is under federal review for procurement fraud, falsified test certifications, and covert acquisition of rural land near critical training corridors. Your son's signatures are on 3 preliminary instruments. 2 are missing mandatory federal vendor clearances. 1 contains a gag clause that violates state law. His tone was flat, clinical. It gave no room for argument. My father's hands trembled as he scanned the page. His eyes hardened as comprehension spread. He turned to Ethan, the porch railing creaking under the weight of his grip. "What have you done, Ethan?" The question came out half roar, half plea, a father's disbelief wrestling a businessman's pride. Ethan lunged toward the paper, but my father pulled it back, holding it out of reach like a leash suddenly remembered. "Dad, you are overreacting. This is political theater. They are just trying to scare us because she—" He jabbed a finger at me, dragged the army into a private deal. "This is her revenge." I stepped forward, calm, because I had already lived the moment he was only now entering. "No, Ethan, this is your mess. I tried to warn you." He opened his mouth to spit another defense, but the general spoke first. "We have emails," Crawford said, eyes never leaving Ethan. "We have timelines. We have payments routed through holding companies that do not exist on paper longer than 90 days. If you did not know, you should have known. If you knew, you are in deeper trouble than you can imagine." The yard went silent except for the slow spin of the rotors and the sound of Linda's unsteady breath behind my father. My cousins stared at Ethan as if seeing him for the first time, without the glow of inherited authority. The projector sheet from his presentation flapped on the clothesline, numbers and promises warping in the wind. Ethan's bravado cracked. "This is a misunderstanding," he muttered, softer now, as if lowering the volume could shrink the facts. "Contracts get cleaned up, lawyers fix language. This is how deals work." He looked to my father for rescue and found none. My father took a step toward him, the page trembling in his fist. "You told me you vetted everything. You told me this was safe. You told me you knew what you were doing." His voice broke on the last word. "You told me she was the problem." He turned to me, eyes burning, grief and regret mingling in a way I had never seen on his face. "Willa, did you know?" It was not an accusation. It was an admission that, for once, he needed me to be right. I met his gaze. "I knew enough to stop it. That is why they are here." Ethan shook his head like a boxer refusing to hear the bell. "You are not stopping anything," he said, but the fight was gone from his tone. "You cannot take this from me." General Crawford's jaw tightened. "This is not about you, son. This is about national security and criminal liability. Step aside." The command in his voice left no oxygen for defiance. Ethan looked around the yard, searching for an ally and finding only witnesses. The weight of his choices settled on his shoulders in real time. I watched it bend him. My father lowered the paper, his voice hoarse. "What have you done, Ethan?" he repeated, softer now, as if asking the question might rewind the outcome. I stayed silent. My eyes said the rest. I took a slow step forward, breaking the silence that had been pressing against my chest like iron. "I never wanted revenge," I said, my voice steady, cutting through the tense air. "But the truth must come out, whether you like it or not." My words landed heavier than I expected, hanging in the space between us like a sentence that could not be revoked. Ethan's face twisted in defiance, but there was a shadow of desperation in his eyes. "You think you're some hero? This isn't your battlefield, Willa. This is business. You don't understand how deals work." He turned to the general, trying to find some crack in the wall of authority standing against him. "She's doing this out of spite. She's just trying to make me look bad." General Crawford didn't blink. "You made yourself look bad, son. Don't confuse consequences with spite." Ethan's jaw tightened, and he took a breath as if to fire back. But the sound of tires crunching on gravel cut him off. We all turned toward the driveway. A sleek black SUV rolled up, followed by another. The doors opened and 3 men in tailored suits stepped out, their movements calculated and cold. I recognized the logo on their briefcases instantly. It was the same corporate insignia I had seen on those contracts, the one buried beneath layers of shell companies. One of them, a tall man with a sharp face, strode toward us. "I'm here representing Grant Industries," he announced. His tone was polished but icy. "We've been made aware of some interference in a private deal. Any unauthorized use of our documents or attempts to slander our operations will be met with immediate legal action." His gaze flicked to me as if measuring the threat I posed. Ethan's face paled. This is a misunderstanding," he stammered. "They have no right." "They have every right," General Crawford interrupted, his voice firm as stone. "And you, Mr. Grant, have no idea what kind of storm you've dragged your family into." The general's expression hardened as he stepped closer to me. "Colonel Grant, you're coming with us. Now." My heart clenched. It wasn't fear exactly, but the sharp awareness that everything was about to shift. Ethan's eyes widened as the word colonel echoed again, louder this time, like a bell tolling the end of a battle he had already lost. "Wait," he said, his voice breaking into something close to pleading. "You're not serious. Willa, tell them this is a mistake." I looked at him, my silence cutting deeper than any answer I could have given. This wasn't about convincing him anymore. This was about the truth, and the truth no longer cared for his approval. The men from the corporation stepped back when General Crawford raised a hand. "This is a federal matter," he said, his tone cold and final. "You will receive official communication from the appropriate channels. Until then, stay out of our way." Ethan's shoulders sagged, the last flicker of defiance draining from him. I could see the fear creeping in, the realization that he was no longer in control of the narrative he had built. My father stood behind him, silent and rigid, his face carved with disbelief. I turned toward the Black Hawk, its rotors still spinning, a relentless reminder of the world I belonged to and the mission that awaited me. Each step I took felt heavier, not because of doubt, but because of the silence behind me. I didn't look back. The truth was already written there, on Ethan's stunned face, on my father's troubled eyes, on the trembling hands of Linda, who stood frozen by the porch. As I reached the helicopter, the general placed a firm hand on my shoulder, guiding me inside. I sat down, strapping myself in, while the roar of the engine swallowed every sound from the yard. I didn't wave, didn't speak. My silence was enough. It carried every answer they would never dare ask. The Black Hawk lifted, and I felt the ground fall away beneath me. Through the window, I caught one last glimpse of the farm, of Ethan standing small and lost, of my father gripping the porch railing as if it could anchor him. I let my eyes close for a second, breathing in the moment. The weight of the truth had finally been set free, and I was ready to face whatever came next. By the time the Black Hawk lifted off, the sound of its rotors still echoing across the valley, the neighborhood had turned into a swarm of whispers. People were gathering at the fence line, pointing, taking photos, trying to piece together the puzzle of why a military helicopter had landed in the Grant family backyard. My father stood stiffly on the porch, his face pale under the late afternoon sun. Ethan was pacing near the picnic table, muttering under his breath, his phone clutched in his hand as if it could shield him from the questions flooding in. The first neighbors arrived before the dust even settled. Mr. Cooper from the farm next door leaned against the fence, his weathered face lined with suspicion. "What's going on here, Richard?" he called out. "Why would the army send a Black Hawk to your property? Something wrong?" His voice carried across the yard like an accusation, sharp and unrelenting. My father didn't answer right away. He stared at the ground, gripping the railing so tightly his knuckles turned white. Linda stepped forward, her tone careful but firm. "It's complicated, Mr. Cooper. Just a misunderstanding." But her voice trembled slightly, betraying the storm brewing inside the house. Then came Mrs. Hayes, the local gossip, who never missed an opportunity to fuel a fire. "I saw that general talking to Willa," she said loudly, making sure everyone within earshot could hear. "He called her Colonel Grant. Did you know she was still in the military? Because the rest of us didn't." Her words sliced through the crowd, and all eyes shifted to my father and Ethan. Ethan snapped. "It's none of your business," he spat, glaring at the onlookers. "Stay out of this. Willa doesn't speak for us." His tone was defensive, but beneath it, I could hear the first tremors of fear. Fear that the truth was slipping beyond his control. He turned to my father. "We can fix this. We just need to stay quiet until it blows over." But the neighbors didn't back down. Someone asked, "What did the general want with Willa? Is she in trouble or are you?" Another voice joined in. "Ethan, we heard your name mentioned by those men in suits. Are you doing business with the military? Or worse?" My father finally raised his head. His voice was quiet but firm. "Ethan, what have you done?" The question hung heavy in the air. Ethan froze as if his father's doubt hurt more than all the neighbors' questions combined. "I haven't done anything wrong," Ethan said, his voice cracking under the pressure. "It's Willa. She's making it look like I'm involved with criminals." You're all believing her just because she came back wearing a uniform. Linda stepped in, her hand on my father's arm. Richard, you saw it with your own eyes. The general came for Willa. He called her Colonel. Does that sound like someone lying to you? Her voice softened. Maybe you've been wrong about her all these years. For a moment, silence fell. My father's face shifted, the anger replaced by something harder to bear, regret. He glanced at the spot where the Blackhawk had landed, as if trying to replay the scene, to understand the weight of what he had witnessed. She never asked for this, he murmured, almost to himself. And I never gave her the credit she deserved. Ethan looked shaken, but he tried to hide it by glaring at the neighbors, who had started murmuring again. They could smell blood. Something was wrong in the Grant family, and now everyone knew it. The tension was unbearable, and for the first time in years, my father looked smaller, as if the foundation of everything he believed in had been cracked. By the following morning, the story had already left the backyard and spread across town like wildfire. Someone had recorded the moment General Crawford stepped out of the Blackhawk and called me Colonel Grant. The video had been posted on social media and shared dozens of times. Headlines like Blackhawk lands at Grant family farm, who is Colonel Willa Grant, were now circulating online. The phone in my father's house rang nonstop. Some calls were from reporters, others from distant relatives who hadn't spoken to us in years, but suddenly wanted answers. Ethan was furious. He stormed into the kitchen, slamming his phone onto the table. "This is your fault," he yelled, his voice echoing off the walls. "You humiliated us. Do you have any idea what people are saying about this family right now?" Linda, who had been quiet for most of the morning, stepped forward like a shield. "Enough, Ethan. You're not going to blame her for this. Willa didn't humiliate anyone. You did that yourself when you signed those shady contracts and lied to your father." Ethan turned on her, his face red with anger. "Stay out of this, Linda. You've always taken her side. You think she's some kind of hero because she wears a uniform? Well, newsflash, she's not perfect. She just got lucky this time, parading around like she's better than the rest of us." Linda's eyes flashed with a rare anger. "Better than the rest of us? She has risked her life for this country while you've done nothing but chase money. Maybe it's time you stop seeing her as a threat and start seeing her as the sister who saved you from losing everything." The argument spiraled, voices overlapping like waves crashing. My father, who had been sitting silently at the kitchen table, suddenly stood. "Enough!" His voice thundered, silencing the room. He looked directly at Ethan, his eyes filled with disappointment. "I've made mistakes. I should have believed Willa. I should have seen what you were becoming before it got this far. But no more excuses, Ethan. No more lies." Ethan looked stunned, as though he'd been struck. His mouth opened, but no words came out. I stood in the doorway watching them, my hands steady at my sides. I didn't need to speak. My silence spoke louder than any accusation could. The video of me being addressed as Colonel Grant continued to play on a loop on someone's phone nearby. Every time Ethan caught sight of it, his face twisted with frustration. "This is what you wanted, isn't it?" he hissed, turning toward me. "To make me look small, to make Dad doubt me? Well, congratulations, you got what you wanted." I met his gaze but didn't answer. I let the silence stretch, heavy and unflinching. My calm unsettled him more than any words ever could. His anger faltered for a moment, replaced by something I hadn't seen in years: uncertainty. He didn't know how to fight me anymore because I wasn't playing his game. Linda stepped closer to me, placing a hand on my shoulder. "You don't have to explain yourself to him," she said softly. "The truth is doing all the explaining for you." I gave her a small nod, my eyes never leaving Ethan's. He shifted uncomfortably, the weight of his own choices finally catching up with him. For the first time, he looked like he was beginning to see himself through my eyes, and through the lens of that viral video. The silence that followed was sharper than any argument. It was the sound of the balance of power shifting. 2 days after the storm in the backyard, I was back at the military base, coordinating with General Crawford's team. The investigation into the corporation Ethan had been dealing with was moving fast. Too fast for comfort. Every document I had collected, every encrypted file I'd sent, was now in the hands of federal investigators. It felt like I had been pulled back into the battlefield, except this time, the enemy wasn't holding weapons. It was hiding behind suits, legal jargon, and greed. Late in the evening, as I walked out of the briefing room, I saw a familiar figure standing nervously by the gate. Ethan. He looked different, less polished, his usual confidence stripped away. His eyes carried a weight I hadn't seen before, something closer to regret than defiance. "Willa," he said, his voice low, "can we talk?" I crossed my arms, my body instinctively defensive. "What is it, Ethan?" He hesitated, glancing at the ground before meeting my gaze. "I was wrong," he admitted, his voice cracking just slightly. "I let my jealousy destroy us. I kept trying to prove I was better because Dad always looked at you like you didn't belong here. I guess I believed it too. But seeing that Blackhawk, seeing them call you Colonel Grant, it made me realize how small I've been acting." I stayed quiet, letting his words sink in. For once they sounded genuine, not like the manipulative half-truths he'd thrown at me in the past. "I didn't know who I was dealing with," he continued, his tone shaking with anger, this time at himself. "They promised me money, power, a way to secure the farm's future. I didn't care about the fine print. I thought I was doing what Dad wanted, what the family needed. But I almost sold our name to criminals." I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder I'd kept, filled with copies of the fraudulent contracts and all the incriminating notes. I handed it to him. "If you want to make things right, start by helping me bring them down. No more lies, no more shortcuts." Ethan took the folder with trembling hands, his eyes scanning the documents like they were bombs ready to detonate. "How deep does this go?" he asked. "Deeper than you think," I said. "The investigation will expose everything, the shell companies, the fraud, all of it. But we need witnesses, and you're the closest one to their inner circle. If you cooperate, you'll protect Dad, Linda, and the farm." For a long moment, Ethan just stood there, the weight of his mistakes written all over his face. Finally, he nodded. "I'll do it. I'll tell them everything I know." That night, we worked together for the first time in years. Sitting in a small room at the base, I walked him through the evidence, connecting the dots he hadn't seen. Ethan's voice shook when he recorded his statement for the investigators, admitting to his involvement and naming the key players from the corporation. Within 24 hours, a task force raided one of the corporation's regional offices. News broke that the company's CEO and several executives were under federal scrutiny. For the first time, the narrative shifted, not just about the company, but about me. Reporters no longer questioned why a Blackhawk had landed on the Grant property. They wanted to know how Colonel Willa Grant had uncovered one of the most significant corporate scandals of the year. Ethan looked at me across the table, his expression filled with something I never thought I'd see from him: respect. "I don't deserve a second chance," he said quietly, "but I hope I can at least help you fix this." The sun was bright that morning, casting a golden hue across the farm where everything had started. It was the same backyard where I had once been mocked, where Ethan's words had cut sharper than any blade. But today, the air was different. It carried a sense of redemption. Rows of chairs had been set up near the old sycamores, and a small podium stood proudly in front of the barn. A U.S. flag waved gently in the breeze, and the hum of anticipation ran through the crowd of neighbors, friends, and even local reporters who had come to witness the ceremony. I stood in full military uniform, polished boots reflecting the morning light. Each medal on my chest was a reminder of battles fought and lives saved. But today, I wasn't here to prove my worth. I was here to honor something greater, the journey that brought me back home, not just as a soldier, but as a daughter and a sister. Ethan stood just to my left, dressed in a dark suit. His face was solemn, his posture straight. He didn't say much, but the look in his eyes said everything. There was regret, yes, but also a quiet pride I had never seen before. General Crawford took the podium, his commanding presence silencing the murmurs of the crowd. "Today," he began, his voice steady and strong, "we are not just here to honor Colonel Willa Grant's service to her country, but also her unwavering courage in facing the battles that cannot be fought with weapons." He paused, letting the words sink in. "Colonel Grant's courage is not just on the battlefield, but also in facing her own family and standing for what is right." I swallowed hard, feeling the weight of his words. My father was sitting in the front row, his hands folded tightly, his eyes misted with emotion. Linda sat beside him, her hand gently resting on his. It struck me how different this moment was compared to the countless times I had left this place feeling unwanted. For the first time, I felt seen. General Crawford continued, This farm, once a place of division, is now a place of reconciliation. It's proof that integrity and love can rebuild even the deepest cracks. He looked at me directly, his expression softening. Colonel Grant, you've not only brought justice to light, but also brought your family back together, and for that, we honor you. He gestured for me to step forward. As I did, Ethan glanced at me, his jaw tightening as if holding back words he wasn't ready to say out loud. I gave him a small nod. We both understood that this moment wasn't about the past anymore. It was about what we were choosing to build from this day on. General Crawford placed a medal over my uniform, the ribbon brushing lightly against my collarbone. I felt a rush of warmth and pride, but I also felt the presence of all those who had doubted me, now standing silently in the shadow of the truth. The crowd erupted into applause, and I saw neighbors who had once whispered about me now clapping with genuine admiration. Ethan finally leaned closer and murmured, "I'm sorry, Willa, I see it now, everything you've done." His voice cracked, raw and unfiltered. I didn't reply. There was nothing to say. The apology lived in his eyes, and that was enough. When the ceremony ended, the sound of the Blackhawk's rotors filled the air once again. It hovered above the field, waiting for General Crawford and his team. I stayed behind for a moment, watching as the helicopter ascended, its shadow stretching across the land like a final salute. My heart felt lighter, as though every weight I had carried for years was being lifted into the sky with it. Ethan came to stand beside me, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Thank you, Willa," he said quietly, "for not giving up on the truth, and maybe for not giving up on me, even when I didn't deserve it." I turned to look at him. "We all make mistakes, Ethan. What matters is what we do after." He nodded, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I'm going to fix what I can. For Dad, for the farm, for you." His words for once were stripped of pride. They were honest. My father walked up behind us, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. He didn't speak at first. He just stood there, looking at me with eyes that held both regret and pride. Finally, he said, "I'm proud of you, Willa, more than I can ever say. I was too blind to see it before, but I see it now. You stood your ground, and you did it with honor." For the first time in years, I hugged him. It wasn't awkward, it wasn't strained, it was real. Linda joined us, wrapping her arms around both of us, and Ethan hesitated for a second before stepping in. We stood there, a family stitched back together by truths that had once torn us apart. Later that afternoon, I walked to the edge of the field, where the wind whispered through the grass. I looked up at the clear sky, where the Blackhawk had vanished minutes before. I felt free, not because I had fought my family, but because I had refused to let their judgment define me. I didn't win by fighting them. I won by standing my ground. Ethan approached me again, his voice softer this time. "You've changed how I see everything, thank you, Willa." I gave him a small smile. Then it was worth it. As the sun dipped behind the barn, casting long shadows across the land, I felt a sense of closure, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that accepts it and builds something stronger. Sometimes the real battle is not out there. It's here, in the place we call home. Before we say goodbye, we'd love to know, where are you watching from? Is it a quiet morning with a warm cup of coffee, or a late night where stories like this keep you company? Let us know in the comments. We read everyone with gratitude. And if this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing to the channel, not just to hear more stories like this, but to be part of a community that still believes in kindness, healing, and second chances. Thank you for spending your time with us today. Wherever you are, we hope you carry the story with you, and remember, sometimes the miracle doesn't knock on your door. It waits quietly until you're ready to open your heart. Take care, and we'll see you in the next story.